Sai Ram. You know, some years ago, Mata Betty said to me, Lynn, I've been asked to speak again about Swami in Auckland. I've been invited to come and give yet another talk about Baba. What more can I say? I can only speak about his love. And that really summed up Mata's relationship with Swami. Mata was our group leader here in New Zealand. She had over 50 interviews with Swami and shepherded hundreds and hundreds of people, not just from New Zealand, but from Australia, Singapore, Fiji, America, and Canada to see him. She was, as Swami explained, his minister for Fiji, New Zealand, Singapore, and Malaysia. The only country she didn't visit was Malaysia. However, Swami was very clear that he had ministers who he sent out into the world to spread his love and his message. We all know that Swami could do this without the help of human beings, but for reasons known only to him, he chose certain people to be his ministers, and Mata was one of those. And the other ministers that I know of, Swami said, to America, I sent Dr. Jack Hislop. To Australia, I sent Murfitt, and that would be Howard Murfitt. And of course, all of these ministers, as Swami called them, authored a number of books about him as well. This was something that I was very interested in, and from the early 90s, I volunteered my services to Mata and a number of other devotees to write their stories. And this took up a lot of my time, and I enjoyed it because I already was involved very deeply with the publishing business. I had been writing and illustrating books for young children and young adults ever since I was 16, with my first book published at age 27. And by this time, I had 78 books under my belt, so I knew the process of publishing and putting together a book. And that really had become my life's work by the time I heard of Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Indeed, it was a book that brought me to Swami. I had just arrived in New Zealand in 1974. I had come from an upbringing in America where I had been raised and attended university and was working for the Washington Post newspaper in Washington, D.C. as a freelancer and also as a fashion artist for an ad agency. To land in New Zealand was quite a shock, and no need to go into the reasons for me coming here other than I was offered a free plane ticket, which you don't turn down, unless it's to somewhere like Timbuktu or Antarctica. But I always wanted to come and have a look at New Zealand. And I was bored with my job, and to be perfectly honest, I was bored with living in America. It was boring, and I wanted some adventure. And I had always wanted to visit the East. I don't know why, but I was drawn to India and the Orient like a moth to a flame. Even as a child, I had been drawing 6-armed goddesses, and this didn't go down too well in my Christian household. But my parents put up with it, and they said, Lynn, these things you are drawing, they are just your imagination, aren't they? And I said, no, they're real. And they said, no, nobody has 6 arms. I said, yes, they do. You see, I was seeing visions of Mother Durga, and I was seeing pictures in my mind of Lord Shiva. Where did they come from? I had no idea. Children just draw what they see in their mind. Little did I know that these must have been glimmers from a past life, and I was just repeating whatever it was had meant a great deal to me in another lifetime. However, when I arrived in New Zealand, now I had never heard of Sathya Sai Baba. I had heard of Paramahansa Yogananda, and that was the only spiritual book I had been able to find in America in my early 20s. They just didn't exist. Maybe they existed in California, but I was raised in a very conservative state on the eastern seaboard, Virginia. Doesn't get much more conservative, Virginia, and you did not see books about India. However, as soon as I arrived in New Zealand, I began to meet some of my local neighbors, and one of them was a book representative for Collins Books UK. He looked at my artwork in my portfolio and said he would like to represent me as his agent. I found him to be a very pleasant gentleman. He was an older man, very much a very quintessential Englishman with the three-piece tweed suit and the beautiful shoes and the briefcase. He was very much a rep, as we called them in those days, and I was quite happy to take him on as my agent. I needed an agent to get into books publishing. You have to have an agent, you see. And he said, by the way, I've just come back from India. I said, oh, India. I've always wanted to go. Where did you go? He said, I've been in a place called Prashanti Nilayam. I said, where is that? He said, southern India. I said, what does that mean? These were words that were completely new to me. He said, it means the abode of the highest peace. I said, oh, did you get some peace there? He said, I got a lot more than just peace. Would you like to hear more about it? I said, I'd love to. He said, there is a man there who walks in the sand. He is miraculous by nature. He shines like the sun, and out of his feet come gold medallions and pearls. I went, really? And I believed him. Absolutely. I believed him, and I said, I want to go. I want to see him. He said, you can go. He said, the accommodation isn't great, and the food is very hot and spicy. Now, this is 1974. He said, but I'm sure you'll go one day. And in the meantime, here's a book. And it was Gita Vahini, one of Swami's own books. I didn't know what Gita meant, and I didn't know what Vahini meant. I knew Wahini was a Hawaiian word for woman, but it's not what a Gita Vahini is. Vahini has to do with knowledge, but I didn't know that. And Gita, what is Gita? I didn't know it meant the Bhagavad Gita. I didn't know what that was either. I looked at the book. It had a beautiful picture of Swami as a young man in a bright red robe and an enormous afro and the most exquisite smile I've ever seen. And I thought, he looks like that yogi, Paramahansa Yogananda. I want to work for him. Where did this thought come from? It just popped into my head. I want to work for you. Well, it wasn't until 1989 that I got to finally look into that face, and a lot happened in between. However, let's skip to 1989, my first trip to Prashanti Nilayam. I had made a deal with this person called Sri Sathya Sai Baba. I had read some of Gita Vahini, and somewhere I had read that God is willing to make deals. In the beginning, Swami said, God is willing to make deals. Now, as an American, that really appealed to me because Americans love deals. And I had made a deal with him. If you are who you say you are, I will serve you for the rest of my life. But you have to prove to me that you are who you say you are. You have to look into my eyes on the first day that I meet you. Well, I got front row on my first day. Swami walked over to me. In those days, he was walking on concrete. The sand had been covered over. There was no Kulwant Hall. We sat outside on the hard concrete, and nobody had told me I needed a cushion to sit on. So it was very uncomfortable. He came right over to me, and he looked into my eyes. He put his hands behind his back and started swaying back and forth like this. And as he looked down into my eyes, I could not find the pupil. I was looking for the pupil in his eyes. Don't ask me why. You know, I wanted him to look into my eyes, and I mean eyeball to eyeball. Well, he was giving me eyeball to eyeball, but I couldn't see the pupil. All I could see was this golden light, and that light was coming out of his eyes and into my eyes. And I saw something blue here on his forehead like a light, and I went, what am I looking at? I didn't realize it was his third eye. I didn't know what a third eye was. Oh, that's my dog. He's just corroborating what I'm saying. And so he didn't speak to me. There was no need for words. I had no words in my head. My entire mind was blank. All I wanted to do was look into those eyes. It was like an eternity. And part of me was just bubbling inside with excitement because I'm going to work for you. I've finally met the big boss. And I didn't know what I was going to be doing for him, but I felt he was giving me some kind of, thumbs up. Okay, let's go. And it's always been like that with me and him. Even when he asked me my first question, the first question Swami asked me was, "What are you doing?" I said, "Books, Swami, your books. I'm doing books about you." "Your books?" He said, "No. Our books. I am very, very, very happy. You're a good girl." I went, he said, "I'm a good girl." I've been waiting to hear that all my life because I thought I was a bad girl. I mean, I'd gotten into some stuff. I was an American college girl. You didn't want to know what we got up to. And I always felt a bit bad about that, later in life. Mind you, I was finally eyeball to eyeball with Swami when I was 40 years old. And I'd already had quite a swinging life. But, and I was, because I knew he knew everything about you, by this time I was a little embarrassed. I thought he might out me in front of everybody in the room, but he didn't. He just called me a good girl. I think I'd been waiting all my life to hear those words. But then Mata Betty said to me afterwards, she said, "Lynn, he said you're a good girl. That means from now on, you better be good." So I was. I really did try a lot harder. And even if you say, "I'm going to try," Swami would say, no, don't try, do. He wasn't interested in you trying to be good. He was like, do it. And that was the beginning of my relationship, face to face with Sri Sathya Sai Baba. He didn't mess around. I knew I could talk to him, and I knew to wait until he asked me the questions. Mata Betty said, "When you get into that interview room, Lynn, don't start peppering Swami with questions. Don't ask him for anything. Don't ask him for a ring. Don't ask him for a japamala. Don't ask him for a better job. Just, he will get the ball rolling." Thank God for Mata Betty, because I had an idea. I wanted a big fat diamond ring. And I had to get rid of those thoughts right away. I knew he could do it. I had heard he could do it. I've seen diamonds that he had created. I'm a jeweler's daughter. I know what a good diamond looks like. But Ma said, "Don't do it, Lynn." Okay. I had learned to obey Mata Betty. She didn't mess around either. She was tough. But that's why she got interviews. She would say, "Lynn, these are not my rules for how to behave in the ashram. These are Swami's rules." And it really wasn't until I traveled with Mata Betty that I began to understand the discipline that Swami requires. He likes silence. He doesn't like chit-chat just for the sake of social interaction in the ashram. In fact, he doesn't care much for it in the worldly sense as well. He always had said, silence is the language of the wise man and woman. But how are we going to get away from that in this worldly world? We've got to talk. It's just that chit-chat, gossipy, what are you doing? What movies are you seeing? What book are you reading? Blah, 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 blah. Did you hear what she said? He said, she said, I said. That's the kind of stuff that Swami's not interested in. So that took me a while to learn to harness my tongue. He said something I'll never forget. He said, the tongue is surrounded by teeth, and the teeth could easily crush the tongue, but the teeth know their job. They know to keep out of the way of the tongue, and the tongue knows how to keep out of the way of the teeth. This is the divine at work in this human body of yours. Everybody knows your job except the mind. The mind is all over the place. The lower mind he's talking about, not the higher mind, the intellect. The mind doesn't know when to quit. The mind is da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da all the time. And it is occupied constantly with worldly matters. I knew what he was talking about, because after he told me I was a good girl, he said, "Your mind is sometimes in the marketplace." Oh yeah, I'm a shopper. I can shop till I drop. And he knew it. He knew I'd been casing out the village, looking at all the shops, planning what jewelry to buy, Christmas presents, da-da-da-da-da. He knew, and he caught me out on it, because this is what he did in the interview room. He immediately addressed what you needed to work on. And he said, "And sometimes your mind is like a monkey." Oh, great. So in that first interview, he zeroed in on me, told me I was good, but then my mind was my biggest problem. This is how he worked. And just because he's not in his physical body anymore doesn't mean he can't work on you or any of us if we invite him to. He likes to be invited, you know. He says heart is not a twin seat sofa, it's single seat, one throne, one chair for me, but you have to invite me in. And that's why I always invite people to put a chair for Swami in their house and invite him in, not just into your house, but into your heart, because that's where he lives. He told me that. He pointed right here to his chest. He said, "Consciousness is God. Find me here in your spiritual heart." And that was truly one of the greatest revelations that Swami gave me personally. The reality of the spiritual heart. It is like a flame. It is a light. It is an atomic spark that lives right here, just to the right of the physical heart. When you feel real love, when you see a beautiful child, when a baby speaks its first word and the parent goes, like that, you see a breathtaking sunset, you taste something so delicious, you go, like that, that's the God within you. He takes many forms because he's using your senses to experience him. Of course, senses can be used for good or bad, but to experience God, he has a million ways to experience him. For example, we respond to him in nature. If we see a beautiful sunset, like that. If we see a beautiful child, as I said, or a beautiful animal, or a beautiful flower, or a beautiful painting. If we see an athlete perform a death-defying achievement in sport, if we see our sports team win, you know, that's the God within us. If we taste something delicious, that is the Brahma aspect inside of us, enjoying the food that is presented before him. That's in the Vedas. It enjoys the food presented before it. It transcends the food and converts it into subtle essence, which radiates in the body, both horizontally and vertically. This is in the Vedas. This is what happens when the God within you is digesting your food, converting it into divine life energy. So next time you're going, that was good, you're experiencing the God within you. I love chocolate. And when I was a kid, I used to say, I only came back here in this lifetime because I needed more chocolate. And I can tell you that when I have chocolate, I get that God feeling. In fact, when you're saying, aren't you just saying Om? Swami said, I am the Om, meaning he is the Om. I am the Om, he said to us. And so that is the God within you. Do you ever think of it like that? I never did until I came to Swami. He made everything a lot more clear. Something that never really happened in my upbringing. Now, I have to confess that I was born into a very devout Christian family. And that was a good thing. Now, my first word was Baba, and my parents were hoping for Mama or Dada, but apparently the first word was Baba. And I was raised in a very strict Christian tradition. There was God the Father, there was Jesus, and I had to go to Jesus and believe in him to be saved, or else that was the end of me. I was going to hell, and the devil would have me for lunch and dinner and breakfast all at once and barbecue me. I wasn't very happy about this, and this created a lot of fear. Now, I'm not dissing Christianity, certainly not. In fact, I am still a practicing Christian, but I have learned through Swami's teachings that the God that I thought was a God to be scared of is a God of love. I created a lot of problems for my Christian minister because in my church I had to attend Bible study for 2 years from age 11 to 13, and this is called confirmation class. And this is where we are educated in all of the beliefs and all of the instruction of the church. And when we graduate from confirmation class, we are then allowed to have communion, which is the body and blood of Christ, the little sip of wine and the little wafer, which represents the body and blood of Jesus. And so my parents were really, this is a big occasion in a Christian family when you're confirmed. And you meet with the minister every Saturday, and you can ask questions. And I had a lot of questions because I had had Bible stories read to me ever since I was a small baby. My dad read me Bible stories every night. I knew the Bible back to front. And in confirmation, you have to learn to quote any verse that the pastor asked you. Can you quote John 3:16? Oh, yep, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. And we had to recite all the creeds. I believe in God the Father Almighty, Jesus Christ, his Holy Son, and the Holy Spirit, and on and on and on. It was very, very structured. But I was starting to get a lot of questions, and one of them was, what happens to all the people who were born before Jesus? They didn't have Jesus to believe in, to be saved. Did they all go to hell? Is that what happened to all those people? Even people like Elizabeth I and George Washington? Did they go to hell? Now, the minister didn't like my questions. And he quite often would say, next question, please. So I came up with another one. Reverend, it says here that on the last day, on Judgment Day, all the dead are going to rise again from their graves. If we have been saved and gone to heaven because we believe in Jesus and we are up there in heaven, does that mean we have to come down again and get into these graves and pop out again? And what do we wear? Because I was fashion conscious. Do we wear sheets? I mean, do we take off our angel robes and do we put on sheets? And the minister said, next question. He didn't like my questions, but they made sense to me. And I said, what about all the people who've been cremated and their ashes thrown out to sea? How are they going to pop out of their graves? They don't have any graves. I mean, I was kind of obsessed, because these children ask these questions. We're fascinated by life and death when we're kids. When our guinea pig dies, it's like, where did my guinea pig go? I mean, this, in the particular way I was raised, we were petrified of death because we might get sent to hell. And this is very scary business for kids. It wasn't until I came across the teachings of Sathya Sai Baba that Swami made things clear. He said, God is a God of love. God has no desires. That's why God is perfect. He has no desires. He has no desire to bless, and he has no desire to curse, to punish. Well, that turned everything that I had been taught on its head. That made everything very clear. And Swami said something else that I have never forgotten, and that entirely changed my way of thinking about life and death. Swami said, and this takes some what I would call spiritual maturity to accept. First of all, you have to understand that this is not your only life, that you have had many, many lives before this. Now, this was not a thought that was popular at all in my upbringing. We were told you have one life to live, so you better live it good. You better be a good girl because you've only got one chance. It wasn't until I came across Eastern scriptures and Eastern thought that the idea of reincarnation and past lives became more palatable for me. Now, my dad was a World War II pilot. He flew 60 missions over Germany as a bombardier, as a pilot, and as a gunner. Many lives were lost, and he felt bad about this. He didn't like talking about the war. But he said to me one day as we came home, I was 13 years old, he said, you know, when I was a pilot, there was a 70% chance of not coming back. He was, fighting for the British. Well, he was an American pilot. He came into the war late. And he said, we were all concerned that this would be our last flight. And so he said a book came out about that time called The Story of Bridie Murphy. It was a story about an Irish woman who had been reborn in the 1940s, but could remember a past life in Ireland. And it was proven that she had lived indeed this past life. The family was found, the grave was found. He said, and it gave us pilots some comfort to think that even though we get killed, we will get another chance at life. When my father told me this, it turned all of my thinking about Christianity upside down. But I believed him because I believed my dad. He was a good man. He was a very good Christian. But this idea of past lives began to haunt me. And I had an encyclopedia, and I started looking up things like reincarnation, transmigration of the soul, and I began to study the history of other religions. And pretty soon, reincarnation in past lives made a lot more sense to me than just, you've only got one life to live. Swami said that you have got to have had 100,000 human lives before you can have the grace of hearing the name Sri Sathya Sai Baba, just to hear his name spoken, to have seen a photograph of him, to have heard about him. I can't even imagine how many lives is 100,000. And that we had lives in other life forms as well. Rock, plant, animal. And our bestial qualities come from lifetimes as animals. If this is too hard to swallow, I can understand. It took me 40 years of study to get to where I am now, and I still just feel like a newbie. However, Swami said this, and this is what I call spiritual maturity is needed. Swami said, in truth, there are no victims. And what is victimhood? Victimhood is embedded in our social thinking like a crystal in a rock. It is immovable. There is victim support. There is victim relief. There are victims of crime. There are victims of war. There are victims of marriage. There are victims of divorce. The word is embedded in our etymology because the victim is someone who has suffered at the hands of another. What causes bad things to happen to good people? What causes bad things to happen to bad people? Well, if you understand the reality of past lives and karma, everything comes full circle. No need to get into it deeply here. I'm just planting the seed. Think about it. You know, if we get another chance at life, if we fall to war or something terrible happens, why did it happen? People often say, why did God let this happen? It has nothing to do with God. It has to do with our own thoughts, words, and deeds. If a really good person meets a sticky end, we say, this is terrible. Why would this happen to a good person? But what did that person do in their past life, or maybe 20 lifetimes past? We'll never know. And you know what? It's not our business. We have to focus on now. Good thoughts, good words, good deeds. That is what creates our fate. That is what rules our destiny. Swami has a lot to say about this, and I can share more. I've probably come to the end of the talk by now. I need a cup of tea, and maybe you do too. So I will say much love and Om Sai Ram.